What's up, everybody? Selvin here with another episode of the Black Student Success Podcast, brought to you by Inquire Higher, where we promote and support the success of Black students and professionals through multimedia. So today, our guest has just about 8 years of experience within the world of higher ed. So just working with students, kind of making sure that they're on track when it comes to, college progression, and just making sure that they know where they want to, be when it comes to that chapter of their lives. He's taken a step into financial services, but what has stayed kind of common within that period of time is just his work and passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So being in this D&I space, we want to talk to him about what that's actually like, what motivated him to get into this particular space, regardless of the industry that he's been in, and any tips that he has for anybody who's even just remotely thinking about getting into this type of work. So Rene Howard-Paez, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we start this show the same way by asking, who is Rene Howard-Paez?
So I'm Rene Howard-Paez. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, from the southwest side of the city. I've been in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for about a decade now, and I've spent the last, as you mentioned, almost a decade working in education. And I've just recently, in less than a year ago, made the transition to financial services. I've got a bachelor's in journalism, which I can talk about later because that doesn't technically match up with what I'm doing now or what I did in the past. But then I also got a master's degree kind of in the cultural foundations of education, which was a great experience. So I'm a learner. I love to talk and to network and to promote new ideas and access to spaces. So I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. So, let's talk about kind of that progression going into education and then eventually financial services. So what kind of motivated you to get into that, especially with the bachelor's degree that you got and then kind of swinging into that master's program?
So I think the degree that I had in journalism, back in those days, it was much more about writing. It hadn't turned into such a heavy emphasis on multimedia just yet. At least the school I was pretty behind. But something that it did teach was communication skills, which I think are invaluable no matter what you do, right? No matter what field of study or what career aspirations you have. So I ultimately landed in recruiting in high school, is where I first started in the secondary education space. So that allowed me to speak, to communicate, to use multiple languages, and it was a great experience. And then I moved on to some D&I work in the education space as well. What I realized was that there's a skill set that people in education spaces, I think from K through 12 and higher ed as well, that they have that often they don't understand how valuable that skill set is, because they can be in an environment where it's tough. It's a lot of work, and maybe you're under mentored, or you feel that you're underpaid, or that there's not a lot of opportunities. So sometimes that can contribute to a mindset that this is a very specific skill set that I can only use within these particular educational spaces. But what I was able to realize, and I'll talk about in a little bit, was that there's other worlds and other industries that are looking for people that have this kind of background, that have been the boots in the ground, so to say, that have been working with students and working with families and have creative ideas. And sometimes the ideas we have bring from education, which are standard there, to corporate spaces, they're very new and innovative, just because they've never been explored before. So I was able to network essentially my way into some interviews, and you take over from there. But I was able to find a use for my skill set in a different space, where I felt more opportunity, ultimately more opportunity for growth, and more access to different opportunities as well.
Yeah. And for the fact that you had the quote unquote grunt work, done, and you were able to have the know-how as far as, what are students' pain points, what are those things that they're missing, and, how you were able to help them within that space, then translated into a different space. And like you said, was something that they probably haven't seen before, would you really deem as very innovative. And I can only imagine that just you having now kind of the space to kind of form not in the traditional sense of either working in high schools or with that particular population, but now working in this corporate setting where you have a little bit more breadth as far as how you can apply what you've done using all those communication skills. And it sounds like that has kind of translated all across the board, regardless of you kind of starting in journalism, still being able to get into this space but still feel like you're doing that, that meaningful work, or at least work that's meaningful to you, but just in a different industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too that in my experience, many people who look like us, and I'm generalizing, right? But we get into education because we want to get back. We didn't see a lot of people who look like us, maybe growing up or even working there in the space. And you're working with people who have great motivations as well, right? But just looking at leadership, and sometimes you're the only person in the room or in leadership. So I'll also add that I have noticed a lot of folks who have tried to transition, be career changers from education to corporate. There's some guilt involved too. There's no trendy label for it yet, or any psychological term that I know of yet, but I almost want to call it the POC, like person of color guilt, where it's like, I'm here, I'm serving my people, and I have this opportunity, but part of me feels like I should be still here giving back. And there's a tough part there that you have to examine to be able to move on. But I will say, anybody who has an opportunity needs to take it, because I thought to myself, if I don't do this now, this may not come around again. And thankfully, I was able to put myself in this space. So I just wanted to add that piece there, that if you are in education, I'm not trying to steer people away from education, because it's definitely noble work and it's necessary. And when teachers are leaving by the masses, I get worried, right? So who's going to teach my kids? I want people who are just as invested as I felt I was in education. But that if you ever are considering, it is common, I think, for many people to feel like they're betraying their own kind, right? To say, I should be here in the trenches trying to make things better. But know that if you are going through that, you're not the only person who's experienced that too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's the first that I've heard somebody mention that. But that's definitely something that I felt, because I came from that area as well, as far as higher education, at least in the traditional sense. And then there was a little bit of that. It was like, well, I have all this expertise that I know that I can really serve to these students, but I'm not going to be able to be utilizing it in that way. But I think part of the growth is being able to use that in different spaces and still feel like that what you've built and what you've learned to really help students directly, you could probably still actually help them directly, or it may just be translated into another form, but still kind of translating as far as the outcome to really meaningful work. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Next, I want to kind of touch on just with you being in the space, kind of working in the space of diversity. What are some of those skills that you feel like you need to have, or maybe that you felt that you've been able to utilize to be successful in your work? And two, with all these initiatives that are coming out, especially recently, there may be some misconceptions behind the work. So if there's anything that you've kind of seen that maybe people on the outside have viewed it in a certain way, if there's a way to dispel that, or something that you want to point out, I want to give you that opportunity to show.
Yeah, great questions. So for the skills, I would say diversity, call it what you want, DE&I or D&I, it's evolving. It's been popularized, definitely, and it's found kind of a stronghold in many spaces outside of corporate or financial services, even education and private education from the world that I came in from. I would say the skill set, especially that helped me transition from education to corporate, is that D&I work can be a very emotionally charged if you, I would say, are a member that's impacted by the work, especially, let's say, a person of color. So if you're Latino, you're doing D&I work in the Latino community. If you're Black, you're doing D&I work in a Black community. There is often a emotional attachment to that work that can sometimes direct your work in a way that perhaps is professionally doesn't have the best outcome. And depending on who hears this, there could be some disagreements, especially in the education space, which was my background. But I would say that understanding how to be a bridge builder and not a bridge breaker is crucial, and how to bring everyone in, knowing that that can contribute to a slower journey and everyone is not always going to agree, but you have to be able to provide opportunities or spaces or strategies that everyone can get on board with, because D&I work it's not successful if it only lives with the marginalized group, right? It has to be from the top bottom. If you're in a company, from a CEO, or from a school, from the president to the principal, or the deans or the trustees, the board of trustees, it has to be understood and accepted and be able to have some sort of rhetoric behind it by everyone. So if you ask anyone, they should be able to say something about your D&I work. Now, that's a challenge, right? What I just said there unpacks a whole lot in terms of what folks in the D&I space have to do. And the D&I space look a little different, right? Depending if you're in education or financial services. So I would say the ability to build bridges, the ability to communicate, the ability to disagree is huge, and the ability to be disagreed with is crucial. And some people struggle with that. For someone to come to your office or to a Zoom meeting and say, "Hey, I actually didn't agree with what you did, or I have some challenges with what content you produce." You have to be ready for those conversations, because we're not looking at a spreadsheet. You might be, as part of your goals, and you're trying to increase your percentage of X amount of community. But this is not a simple equation, and there is no linear path often to the answer of D&I. So building those bridges, communication, and being able to disagree or be disagreed with, and to understand multiple perspectives. This is evolving work. It's ever changing. And now I'd say the educational space is catching up in terms of saying, "Hey, we've got this minor in this, or we've got this certificate program in this," but you still can't go realistically get a master's or a PhD in just D&I work in the corporate space or the educational space. There are similar degrees, right? Concentrations or certain classes, but overall, it's still not something you can go and learn. It takes a certain amount of general knowledge, street smarts, so you say experiential knowledge, and then also that book smarts as well. For your second question about what are some misconceptions, I'll start with misconceptions about corporate / the financial services industry. I would say one is that you have to be, I think you'll like this, that you have to be great at math. And although we're in the financial services industry, one misconception is, "Oh, I'm a financial representative," right? That's one portion of our company. We do that all over the country. But then within what I'm finally understanding, every company has a learning and development person. Every major company, Fortune 100 company, has a business, a tech analyst, or whatever it is, or someone who's doing software coding and engineering. And that's where I found my skill set, right? In education, diversity and inclusion, recruiting, learning and development. Every company has a recruitment team, right? And so although I'm not deterring students or anyone to stay away from math. Actually, when I was in the schools, I would say study. Degrees, when you go to college, business and math are the best ones you could do, because they're very competitive for jobs. But that you have to be super in tune, or that you have to have experience in that industry. I had zero experience in this corporate industry that I'm in. And I'd come in, there was a need for my skill set. And then I realized, as I started traveling, going to conferences, every other financial services firm has someone who's doing what I'm doing. And they've been doing it for quite some time. So I would say a misconception is can come to you from being insulated. If you've never left an industry, whether it's corporate or education, you often don't know what's going on outside of the world. And that can be combated by networking, meeting new people, and understanding that no matter what your skill set is, if you're a student listening to this, no matter what you're studying, there could be a space in corporate. There also could be a space for you in education, but just having that core understanding that you don't have to be locked in, especially if you network yourself to understand that.
Yeah, no, that's good that you pointed that out, and good to kind of even show that still applies to whether you're in whether in the education space, or you're in the corporate space, or in whatever capacity, that there's so many different components as to what makes any either school or business kind of operates, and it needs just more than someone who's really good at math, or someone who's really good at English. So it's good to know, and just really hear that there are these different, as we would call them, departments, of different types of people with different skill sets, and you have built yourself up to a point where your company now found a need, and then saw the value in your skills there. It was one thing I wanted to touch on, was the disagreement part, because I think that is really important to kind of dig a little deeper into. And specifically, I want to know how do you specifically disagree? Like, how do you really approach the that point of conflict when it comes to either bringing forth ideas within this space? What maybe tips that you have with anybody who's either thinking of this particular area, or just any other profession that does require a little bit of that, like I said, conflict, before coming to a point that you can kind of start working through those ideas and getting those into fruition?
That's a great question. And I would say in this current age that we're in, disagreements are not embedded in the culture, I would say, right? We're on Zooms more, everybody's nodding their head, there's a lot of positivity going around. So when it's time to say, hey, actually, I don't think that's right, I feel like the impact is multiplied often, right? Whereas when when there was less technology, I feel that, and I'm definitely not some old timer, right? But that the age of advancement that we're in, it's quick, it's fast, and we have to make decisions. And generally, we're not pausing unless it's major to say, hey, actually, I like that. We might just say, you know what, let's move on with it. It's not enough for me to ruin the relationship potentially, or to cause a stir about that. So I would say, generally, when dealing with disagreements, separating the emotion is easier said than done, but that's one major challenge. Understanding that the person that's coming to you isn't or shouldn't be attacking you personally, but in fact, a decision or a program or something that you did. Two, being able to listen and understand that this person is not against you. If someone has come to you to disagree within your company or your school or your organization, to me, that's them demonstrating that they care enough to put themselves out there, knowing that they probably don't feel great about doing this either, although you might forget that being on the other side of the aisle. So understanding that this person cares enough about whatever cause you're working on to come put themselves out there to potentially have a challenging conversation with you. Like, you could be friends, you could not be friends. So to appreciate that person's point of view and to have some empathy and trying to put yourself in their shoes as well. And two, to truly listen and know that you may not get to an answer right away. So oftentimes it's totally okay to say, hey, I hear what you're saying. You gave me a lot to think about. Let me circle back with you, knowing that if you respond quickly, it may be charged, it may be emotional, and then you may go back later and say, oh, I wish I didn't really say that. So why don't you just give yourself some time and say, hey, let's schedule another touch point. I really appreciate that you came and talked to me, but knowing that maybe a little bit of time to not have the answers, because you might have clouded thinking and you may have just worked on something. This has happened to me before. You work on something for a long time, someone comes and said, hey, I actually had some problems with that. But hopefully you are building a culture where people feel welcome to do this. If no one is ever coming to you with a disagreement, I would say that is a challenge, and that could potentially be a red flag, because you don't want to exist in a culture that is a bunch of yes people, right? Where it's just yes, they're telling you what you want to hear. You want someone to be able to confront you, but you also want to build that positive confrontational culture, which sounds kind of ironic, right? But to be able to say, hey, I feel comfortable enough knowing I can come to you, talk to you, and knowing this won't ruin our professional or personal relationship, and that I have the skill set. And then by modeling that behavior, you can also teach the other person as well, in case they are struggling with how to come and disagree with you.
There we go. So now you have to coin positive confrontation.
Confrontation. Yeah, well, TM right here.
Yeah, we'll get it in the textbook, right? Now, I want to touch on just you mentioned things like insulation, the value of communication. We just talked about the most productive way to disagree with somebody, and then how to receive that disagreement. Is there any other advice that you would have to a Black student who is either looking to get into the D&I space, into the corporate space, even in education, or just in general, based off of anything that you've picked up along your journey?
Yeah, another great question. I would say the number one disservice that a student could do to themselves is to not network. And the art of networking has transformed in the last 5 to 10 years. And even if you are a introverted student, you still can find ways, or have to find ways, I implore you, to be able to communicate. It could be Zoom. If it's in person and you're a nervous person, write the questions down, run them by someone else. I landed my corporate job because I interviewed well, but I was given that opportunity and got the endorsement of more than one person because I had started networking ahead of time, not knowing that I was even looking for a job, but everything fell into place perfectly. And so I think networking is crucial. And there are actually a lot of cool programs that are up and coming, and even curriculum now centered around like first generation students, if you're first gen, or how to network. But what you can do to start is finding a mentor, someone who has taken a liking to you, and just say, hey, I want to start sending some emails out. Can you read them? Because you also want to make sure that you come correct, as we say, right? You want to come professionally. So I would say mastering that art of networking at an early age, the students that I have had that just get it initially, they're going to go very far, no matter what their GPA was and what the, you know, what their test scores was. I just know they will go far because they have mastered the art of communication and networking, and they will pair it with the skills. Someone that has all of the skills, let's say you're a great scientist or computer programmer or mathematician or whatever it is, or financial analyst, but you have to find your way to communicate. It doesn't always have to be the same. You don't have to be comfortable speaking in front of 900 students, but you have to find a way to get yourself out of that bubble and ask people to introduce you to others. So you have to be conscious of your brand and start putting yourself out there. Hey, I'd love to meet someone who works in learning and development or in tech, but in a different space. Who do you know that's in that space? Hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so? What you will find is that communities of color, they love to lift each other up for the most part. And if you find those people, they're going to be so excited. I have students still texting me to this day, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I say, hey, I know this person, let me connect you. It's a small community in the city where we live. So let me broaden your horizons to that bit. So I would say network, network, network. And you may hear that a lot. What does that mean? Truly explore it. If you have an opportunity in a class to take a networking 101 or interpersonal communication, those classes will be invaluable for you in the future. And I remember I actually took a class that taught me how to speak. And if you said, the professor would start knocking on the table. And he did it enough that you would take it out of your repertoire. And that one small class, I still keep in touch with that professor to this day, right? So learning how to speak, learning how to present yourself, what is your brand, getting a LinkedIn, even if you're not a social media person. I didn't have a LinkedIn until I was going to corporate, but I had to do it, right? And now here we are, right? So, but really figuring out how to network, putting yourself out there, knowing some people may not respond to you, and that's okay, but start reaching out. Hey, I'm a student in such and such. I saw that you know this person. I would love to connect with you. Can I meet you for coffee or for a Zoom to learn more about your job? And then guess what? Then I hear the full circle stories down the line. That one interaction ultimately can lead to a job. Not all the time, but more than that.
Yeah. I think that the most important or just a highlighted piece of from that was just, finding your way to communicate, because there's always more than one way to do it. We always get into the, introverts versus extroverts, but both groups, have their own way to communicate and can meet the same ends, from taking different paths. So I'm glad that you're able to expand on that. Now, with the work that you've done, I know that you have some board member work that you're also involved in. You obviously came from a world of education, so it feels like in some cases, especially if you have similar backgrounds of those you're serving, that you're already kind of paying it forward, in the work that you're doing. But beyond your career, or what your duties are that you're being paid to do, how do you pay it forward? What are some of those things that you feel really pulled or drawn to do to really give back, based off of what you've picked up along the way?
Another good question. In my opinion, there is nothing worse in a professional experience than seeing someone who looks like you, that has made it, quote unquote, that isn't willing to extend that arm down to you, whether you've requested it or not. I think that as communities, we need to continue to lift ourselves up and our next generation. So one piece of it, one way that I intend or try to pay it forward is I say yes as much as I can. I say yes as my time allows. And I always try and take meetings or introductions, because I'm also doing that in my professional life, but now I have a younger generation who's asking me to do the same. So knowing that a quick text to connect someone or to give some advice from someone that you connected with years ago, it doesn't take that much to respond, right? It could be a day late, but just make that effort and know that just because you've made it or you're good or you're in a place where you finally want it to be, that to me, that's not enough. We still have to continue to build up our communities and extend that hand down. And there's a quote that says, send the elevator back down, right? Because there's plenty of room at the top. I love that quote, because no matter how high you make it, you want to do that. Another good quote, lift as you climb. I think that's from Ella Baker. So as you're climbing in your career, I love it when people extended their hand down to me. That's how I got here as well, too. And I try and do the same thing, too. So for some people, you'll be sending an elevator down. And for others, you'll be climbing your own path, but you can also put your hand down, right? And these are all symbols and metaphors that I'm using, but to say you can never stop reaching out. And I'm so connected to education that I joined a school board for a local Catholic high school, right? Because they asked me to, and they said, why aren't you on other school boards? I said, no one had asked me. I'm actually super excited to do this. And now I had to put some pause on some other things within our new work, but I was more excited to give my time and to be able to be connected. And guess what? Now I'm in a position where I feel privileged and I have some actual, I wouldn't say power, right? But I can influence some decisions that will impact my communities versus when I was just boots on the ground. I was just working with students and families, and then policies, let's say, were coming down to me and I just had to enact them. Now I can inform the policy. And we just need more of that and more of a diversification of that. So as much as you can, send the elevator back down and lift as you climb. We need to keep doing that for our communities, because when you see that person and they don't reach out or they don't respond and they look like you, it hurts a little bit more, I would say. So let's try and change that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's I think it's probably really two really good quotes that you pull from that. To really describe just the importance of doing so, and kind of showing the ways that you've continue to do so, even outside of your work, knowing that, the time that you're providing, even though you might be putting some other things on hold, that that time is going to something that's really significant. So I appreciate you, explaining all that. So, anything else that you want to give to our audience before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to Sullivan and the team for having me here. For anybody who's listening to this, just know that there's a million possibilities in the world that we live in, right? I have family in different countries, and I know that we are in a position of privilege sometimes, no matter who you are, to be here and to have access to this. Continue to work, continue to learn, get that next certification, take that LinkedIn course, go back to school and get the degree, because if you don't do it now, it's only going to get harder. I took that advice. So just start doing things now. Don't wait until tomorrow. It'll be too late. Just keep going forward. Continue to educate yourselves, and best of luck in your journey.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you, Rene, for dropping all the advice, everything that you learned on your journey. We'll definitely have all of his information in the description if you ever want to reach out to him if you have any questions. Thanks to everybody who's been watching and listening. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast on any of the major streaming services. Check out our website, inquirehigher.com. We've got a lot of great information there. And you can follow us on social media. It's pretty much at Inquire Higher on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as Instagram. So until next time, peace.